Thank you for sharing the celebration of Gordon Higginson's life with me. He's probably the finest contemporary evidential spiritualist medium. And in my book, he is the finest. Gordon Mons Higginson, he was born in November 1918, a Scorpio, and he passed away in January 1993. And he was born and passed away in Longton. It's in Staffordshire in the West Midlands. This is Gordon's portrait in the Arthur Findlay College library, and it's very fitting because Gordon is synonymous with the Arthur Findlay College. He spent limitless hours lecturing and demonstrating in the library, and he virtually lived there in his own rooms. And so it's my honour to celebrate Gordon's life with you, and I just want to introduce his accounts and predictions and teachings. And he told me these between around about 1980 to 93 when he passed, either at his home or on countless residential weeks at the Arthur Findlay College in the UK. I can't do the talk without mentioning Professor Archie Roy, because I met these two people separately, but around about the same time in 1980. So in summary, it was postgraduate study that took me to Strathclyde University in Glasgow, and I stayed about 8 years. And then a lecturing post took me to the West Midlands and then on to Devon, which is England. And it was my choice that I returned to Glasgow again and stayed about 17 years until very recently when we've moved back to England again. I don't believe in coincidences, and Glasgow was the home of Archie Roy, and the West Midlands was right next to Staffordshire, which is where Gordon Higginson lived. Before the postgraduate studies took me to Glasgow for the first time, I did my first degree in Arabic and Islamic Studies and Religious Studies at Lancaster University in the UK. And then I went on to live alone for 2 years in Jordan, Syria, Egypt, and Israel. As a historian of spirituality, I thoroughly enjoyed exploring these areas and stayed about 2 years. And to sponsor myself, I was teaching English, and I visited many times since. But I think perhaps my story began when I started visiting a shamanic Bedouin, henna-haired Jordanian cave lady who read my future from her blank book. And she had lots of plane tickets there in her cave sent to her from America and everywhere of people wanting her to go there and help them with problems and read their futures. But she didn't use any of those tickets. So that was my I think beginnings of looking into people with psychic or mediumistic abilities. And when I looked at her book, it's just blank pages. So my journey began, and it's a continuing spiritual journey, when I met Gordon and Archie around about the 1980s. So that's 42 years ago, without giving away my age. So when I joined Archie's renowned long-running psychical research night school class at Glasgow University, I then became one of the first members of Archie's Scottish Society of Psychical Research, because the SSPR was well attended then. People used to want to come to hear Archie's lectures. I joined the SPR, which is the Society of Psychical Research based in London, and the Spiritualist Nationalist Union as a Class B member, which is based at the Arthur Findlay College, the Scientific Medical Network, and threw myself into countless Arthur Findlay College residential weeks with Gordon Higginson. So it was several for a year from about 1980 to 93. I have been since, but they were the ones particularly with Gordon. Most days I attended spiritualist churches because in Glasgow, there's virtually every night there's a different church on. And weekly I would go to sittings at an SNU church with good quality mediumship and have one-to-one sittings with mediums. And I received Leslie Flint tapes and Ivor James and many other direct voice trance mediumship tapes. So I was really threw myself into it from about 1980. After about 9 years in Glasgow, I moved to the West Midlands to lecture in English and be a student counsellor at Solihull College. But I taught psychical research in the evenings at Warwick University and Stoke Park College. And then on to Devon. I used my 20 years by that point, from 1980 to 2001, accumulated research to write 200,000 word MPhil and Ph.D. dissertations on shamanic, out-of-body, near-death experiences and mediumship. It was a private university, and I'd spent a year writing to universities around the UK and really had got nowhere because the sociology department in Exeter wanted me to study the people, not the phenomena. And somebody in Oxford wanted me to sort of poo-poo people's experiences. So I gave up in the end after a year of writing. And then I was told about this private university, which was sponsored to do postgraduate degrees and degrees by the US state of Wyoming. And it was a unique department of consciousness studies and sacred traditions, which was just up my street with my religious studies background. And what I did, I analysed evidence of survival, quality of the accuracy of the mediumship, the spiritually transformative impact of the mediumship, and the changed worldviews and impact on life. My supervisor was Dean Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Fensky. She was the IAND's president and editor of Vital Signs, their journal. And Diane Corcoran, IAND's president of today, she researched and lectured there too. And the Dr. Lingier, a psychiatrist, he also researched there, and other esteemed researchers. But sadly, it's now closed. My external examiners was Professor Carl Lindgren, an educationalist and polymath and author, and Dr. Crawford Knox from Oxford. And meanwhile, I edited UK university MPhils and PhDs and university lecturers' books, and that helped to pay my way. And I taught psychical research in the local Devon colleges and wrote the book Moses and Jesus the Shamans, and the foreword was by Professor Archie Roy. So just a little bit more about the background to the friendships. When I went back up to Glasgow, Archie invited me to become a Scottish Society Psychical Research Council member, and Archie was the SSPR. And the SSPR editor of the Psi Report, their journal, requested I write articles on my personal mediumistic and psychic experiences. And these will be on my website, JackieJonesHunt.com. My old site's just gone down and the new site goes up in the next few days. I taught day and evening psychical research in Glasgow at the University of Strathclyde and the University of Paisley, now known as the University of West of Scotland. And Archie said to me, as he continued his psychical research classes too, that I would be more and more fluent with my subject because I was teaching it. So he was very supportive. I wrote 2 more books, which was Proof Animals Have Souls and 500 Plus Celebrities Go Vegetarian. And they're 2 in a series, and possibly I will write some more in that series. I was the book review editor for about a year, perhaps a bit longer, of the Academy for Spiritual and Consciousness Studies in the USA. And I had columns in their 2 journals, the Searchlight and the Journal for Spiritual and Consciousness Studies. And I attended the Arizona conference, but sadly had to decline an invitation to talk on the seer, Emanuel Swedenborg, who's mentioned in my book in some depth in Moses and Jesus the Shamans, because I became a carer for my 91-year-old mother-in-law for 3.5 years. She lived with us until she was 94.5. Here's some pictures. Here's Victor and Wendy, Sonia and Aldi, and Karen Herrick, the president at that time. So that was at the conference, which was a happy time. So there's probably a lot about Gordon on the internet, but my talk's a light-hearted, personal, introductory approach to a dear friend who became a spiritual father to me. I did end up loving him very, very much. He was such a beautiful gentleman. So to introduce his brilliant evidential mediumship, his life events, his teachings and predictions, as he told me at the Arthur Findlay College in his home, is an honor. He was an outstanding and passionately dedicated man. He was charismatic, charming, mischievous, humorous, and highly intelligent, but very dedicated to his art. He predicted I'd write books and teach on the subject. Well, I have 3 at the moment, and hopefully more to come. Moses and Jesus the Shamans gives information about mediumship, and Proof Animals Have Souls and 500 plus celebrities go vegetarian, again, is making the case we are all animals, so we all have souls, we all have eternal energy. So Gordon's lectures will be going on my website in the future, and obviously they'll be free for anybody who would like to listen to them. At Gordon's funeral, I was deeply touched to be gifted with a red rose from Gordon's coffin lid, which I preserve to this day. And recently, I do believe it was Gordon who told me to reopen my preserved lectures of his and put them on my website for people to hear. So it'll be Gordon doing Zoom meetings and Gordon doing lectures again. Now, I first saw Gordon demonstrate his mediumship in a huge Liverpool theatre when I returned home to Liverpool from Jordan. And that's Liverpool of the Beatles fame. Soon after, I moved to Glasgow for the postgraduate studies, but I'd initially touched down back from the Middle East. And I was fascinated to see Gordon and his amazingly accurate evidential mediumship. This was my first contact with him. He was contacted by the fallen in the Falklands War, which was between April and June in 1982. There'd really been no war news in Jordan. Gordon gave names of people and ships. He gave physical features of spirits, causes of death. And these were third-party communication mediumistic evidence. And with that came emotionally healing messages. And my future husband, not met yet, was a Royal Marine. He had a green beret and he fought in that war, possibly by coincidence. Gordon's birth and mission was foretold by spirit. At Longton Spiritualist Church in Staffordshire, which is near the West Midlands in England, the medium told Gordon's future mum, who was called Fanny Higginson, at only the age of 14, spirit predicted her future mediumistic son will have great work to do. And she was also told that the Higginson name would link to Longton Spiritualist Church for 100 years. And the medium continued naming and saying her mother has just passed a spirit while she is here in the Spiritualist Church and is here to tell her this. So obviously crying, Gordon's future mother returned home, finding this evidence to be true. And she had 2 sons and a daughter, and then Gordon. So she had to wait to see which was the one that she felt was going to be the medium, because the others weren't mediums. So Gordon was called the Boy Wonder. And at the age of 3, he sat in circle, first of all leaning on a cushion by his mum, and later chair legs were cut short so the feet could touch the floor. At age 10, he was permitted to give messages. And at age 12, he was permitted to perform the first demonstration at Longton Spiritualist Church, Staffordshire. Gordon gave names, addresses, phone numbers, and the so-called deceased were proven to all and sundry that they were communicators. This was mediumship, not psychic abilities. Gordon was a trance, clairvoyance, and materialization medium. Gordon's mother, his strict teacher and best friend, she trained Gordon. She was an excellent evidential spiritualist medium herself, and she passed only in 1978. She trained her son's natural mediumship, and he probably became the best contemporary evidential, detailed, accurate spiritualist medium, and he's certainly the UK's most famous medium. Now, Gordon demonstrated evidence of survival in countless churches, halls and theatres, including the Royal Albert Hall in London. Now, we've mentioned the Arthur Findlay College, so this is Arthur Findlay of Arthur Findlay College fame. He was a Glasgow stockbroker who became a prolific writer on spiritualism, and he left his Stansted, UK vast mansion to become the Arthur Findlay College for the development of and experimentation with mediumship and spiritual philosophy. And Gordon told me family pressures regarding Findlay's will began to change Findlay's mind, and he passed before the will was changed. But cheekily, Gordon said he was glad he passed before the will was changed because he knew the work that the Arthur Findlay College was going to do. Please excuse my picture on these photographs, but they're not copyright because they're my photographs. So this is introducing the Arthur Findlay College. I looked through my pictures, and here is a good picture of the Arthur Findlay College, and you can get some sort of idea of the size of the place. This is where Gordon lived, lectured, demonstrated most of the time. He lived with his sister Hazel in Staffordshire, but as I say, he spent most of his time here. He travelled up and down the country, but he spent most of his time here. And my photos show my innumerable, every year, weeks at the Arthur Findlay College, many times a year, every year, for years. You can see another picture of the home there, and over to the right is a chapel that was built on where they used to do Sunday services, where the local residents were also invited, people who weren't on the residential courses. And it was quite phenomenal, the evidence that was given out to people. It's notable that Gordon also psychically read the emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical auras, which are a predominant thoughts and actions create. Emanuel Swedenborg and others would say, our spiritual or otherwise auric emanations determine with perfect karmic justice our after-death landscapes in a labyrinthine world, an idioplastic, malleable to thought, spirit realm in which like attracts like. Gordon was the longest-serving president of the Spiritualist Nationalist Union from 1970 to 93. He was the minister of the Spiritualist National Union as well, so he did weddings and funerals. He was the principal of the Arthur Findlay College, and he was also the president of Longton Spiritualist Church. Gordon told me he didn't want to be the president of the SNU, and yet he was for 23 years. But the story behind that is one night, very tired after midnight, traveling home from Portsmouth Temple, Gordon took a wrong turn, realizing he was en route to the Arthur Findlay College. He phoned Mr. Sills, the manager of the Arthur Findlay College, to stay the night. But the next morning, Mr. Sills told Gordon a monk was waiting for him in the library. But this was impossible, as no one knew Gordon was there and had taken that detour. The monk told Gordon he must become the president of the SNU, and that spirit had guided Gordon there in the middle of the night. Standing in the gallery next to the open library door, Gordon told the Arthur Findlay College manager the command he'd just received. So the Arthur Findlay College manager said to him, well, you must accept. So they both re-entered the library, and there was no other way out, and they found the monk had literally disappeared. So Spirit had in mind that Gordon had work to do with the Spiritualist Nationalist Union, demonstrating evidence of survival. The Arthur Findlay College became my home from home. This is taking snaps with Gordon and my mum there on the stairs. And this is the Great Hall, so you'll be seeing lots of pictures of the college inside and out. And there's Gordon there in the blue jumper. Gordon kindly suggested I photograph this week's team of mediums, but now I'm looking at it, I do think Gordon's precognition had kicked in, because he knew I'd be looking for photographs for my current Zoom talk that aren't copyright. Mavis Patilla is on the right, and she later gave me a further reading in her Manchester home. And Betty Wakeling is on the left. She was a flower clairsentience lady. She lived in Blackpool, and Martin Young is there at the back. So all week, every week, mediums give readings and demonstration throughout the Arthur Findlay College weeks. Which is phenomenal because you're talking to spirit all week. This is Gordon in the library, and he smiled over at me as he's daily lecturing in the library, jovially telling me to take his photo. So I got my camera out and took it. And as I say, Gordon's precognition regarding my talk on his life, I think that's why he was saying this. He called me his regular student, and he was and is a sensitive, humorous, clever, quick-witted, mischievous gentleman, but very much a gentleman. He was and is passionately dedicated to proving life continues after physical death and the after-death consequences of this. You know, the different realms and landscapes that we go to. I witnessed Gordon's physical phenomena. Gordon evidenced his communications with third-party communicators, and he won over skeptics. It was just phenomenal, the information that he would give. Even the TV series with Randy had Gordon there and some others, but they wouldn't play back the evidence that he had given. And this did deeply upset Gordon because they were out to try and poo-poo the subject. And as I say, he was born a natural medium, but with patient, dedicated years of meditation, Gordon honed his gifts to become a trance medium, spirits talking through him. And later he became a physical phenomena medium, producing ectoplasm for spirits to manifest their etheric bodies as recognizable as their physical bodies. This was a wintry November evening when I went, and Gordon wore only a simple white dressing gown, which was verified by a male attendee. And I didn't see Gordon for nearly 2 days. He meditated and fasted in preparation for the demonstration. No one was allowed to record or photograph due to Gordon's previous burns around his navel. The slightest click from a camera or recorder caused the ectoplasm to drop to the carpet and retract, burning him. And cheekily, he told me he'd told the hospital that he was rushed to it was a hot water bottle burn. And I wonder if it was this photograph which caused that accident, because our group was told that from now on, nobody's to bring in cameras or recorders. Gordon produced the materialization of a Zeebrugge ferry victim. Gordon's guides, a young girl, Cuckoo, who he knew from childhood and used to play with, and he called her Cuckoo, so the name stuck. And Chu Chow and Paddy assisted and spoke. So this was direct voice trance phenomena. In stages, Gordon went deeper and deeper into trance, and ectoplasm poured from Gordon's mouth. Our group was told we were all meant to witness these phenomena. A young man materialized, and he was a Zeebrugge disaster victim. He spoke to his mother in the audience, and we learned she was becoming ill with grief and must stop grieving. And there wasn't a dry eye. It was a very spiritual and uplifting experience. Her son, spirit son, consoled her, saying he's with his fiancée as they passed together. But emotion finally broke the connection, because he broke down when he said he didn't understand why they had to go at this early point in their lives. But I'm sure it did help the mother, and it was incredible proof for all of us who watched. Just to give you a little bit of information on that, I looked it up recently because I haven't done since that, because it was enough to see the young man. And I see how this poor man died. It was the MS Herald, a free enterprise, a roll-on, roll-off British car ferry. 193 people were killed. And it capsized only moments after leaving the Belgian port of Zeebrugge on its route to Dover in the UK. And unfortunately, a crewman named Stanley failed to close the bow doors, fell asleep, and both Sable and Lurie failed to check the bow doors. So it's human error. And Stanley, bleeding and cold, helped rescue survivors, but he was haunted, obviously, by his mistake. He went into hiding and he died at the age of 58. And in the newspaper article, it said most people in UK Dover knew somebody on that ferry. So it was a dreadful disaster, but I hadn't heard of it, been off in Jordan for quite a few years beforehand. I was friends with Gordon and Archie. Archie sent me his book, Archives of the Mind, and phoned and emailed during the years when I lectured in the West Midlands and Devon. And both Gordon and Archie were pleased I was spreading the psychical research with my courses and writing up my research for the MPhil and a Ph.D. on the subject. And from the time I took Archie's psychical research night school class till almost his passing in 2012 with pneumonia, we were decades-long friends. And this is his notes in a book he sent to me. And he sent me this of Archives of the Mind, and he was very supportive of my research, which I sent to him when I'd completed it, and he read it and sent it back with a big tick. This is Gordon posing for my photo at the AFC library. He was a humorous and very compassionate, caring man. He talked of a wickerwork table moving on its own after his home seances. And his mother, as I mentioned, waited to see which of the sons was to be the medium that Spirit had foretold. And I do believe that Gordon sat in seances for royalty. The Highland seer, Sween MacDonald, who was a friend of mine, who's another one who's passed, sadly, all of them have passed. He was the seventh son of the seventh son. And when I was staying with him and his wife in his Ardguy Highland home, he told me that Prince Charles had come with his bodyguards and said he'd deny his visit if Sween ever said that he'd come to his Highland croft. So I do believe the same was said to Gordon, that Prince Charles would deny it if Gordon ever mentioned it. But with a wink and a nod, I do believe Gordon did do seances and readings for royalty. Gordon taught at the Arthur Findlay College on the first summer school in 1965, and from then on he taught there almost till his passing. And he also taught, as I mentioned, across the UK, but he was predominantly at the Arthur Findlay College. His guide, Light, this is another of his guides, he visited only once a year with predictions, and his other guide was Dr. John, who was Gordon's spiritual healing guide. Sadly, Gordon had some mini strokes in 1990, and he was quite perturbed because being a medium all of his life, his medium halted temporarily, but it did come back. It was while he was healing. But when you're a medium all of your life and seeing spirit all of your life, for it suddenly to disappear, but it did reappear quite quickly afterwards. Gordon told me he spent more hours in meditation than sleep. Now that's discipline. He taught me that his mother told him to describe the communicator's appearance, and this is how he used to demonstrate. He'd also name the communicator, perhaps his or her job, interests, street or area name. He'd describe how the spirit communicator passed to spirit, and only after such evidence he'd then give the spirit communicator's message, because you knew who it was coming from. So Gordon's excellent evidence of survival converted each and every skeptic. And as an infant, he sat in circle on a cushion from the age of 3. And as I said, the chair legs were cut short so his little feet could touch the floor. And he told me that as a young man, impatient and regularly leaving home from his mum, who was very strict but a brilliant teacher, he learned that patience would win the day and give him excellence. In World War II, Cuckoo saved him and his men. Fellow soldiers regularly asked Gordon, "Will you die today?" Answering no, and knowing Gordon spoke to spirits, many men felt safer at Gordon's side. So in Italy, desperate to retreat from heavy German tanks and artillery, trapped by a collapsed bridge over a dangerously fast-flowing river, Gordon's commander asked him, "Will you die tonight?" No, was the answer. So the commander asked Gordon and volunteers to attempt to retreat through the dangerously fast-flowing, flooding river. Gordon asked his lifelong and childhood spirit friend, Cuckoo, to save them. So this young female guide told Gordon to follow the bouncing ball. But this bouncing ball only Gordon could see. So he followed it across the flooding river. But the ball went bobbing across right and left, forwards and backwards. They were all drenched in fearful faith, following across the perilous river. leading Gordon and the men away from death. And if it wasn't death, it would have been a prisoner of war camp. Now, Gordon often told me how he saw spirit people as clear as physical people, and sometimes he had to take a quick check to see which one it was. Another example, in World War II, Gordon told me of his new shoe shop job. When a man walked in, Gordon politely hurried over to assist with the man's shoe selection. It's not like that today. So realizing the man was a spirit, not in the physical body, the spirit told Gordon his colleague is hoping for good news as she knows he's missing in action. Turning around embarrassed, Gordon's co-worker thought he'd gone mad. And at first Gordon said, "I'm just practicing." It gives you a slight insight into Gordon's humor. But then Gordon told her of her brother's tragic news, and he later created shoes with hues as Gordon saw auras. And this became part of his business for generally the rest of his life, but it always took the back burner. He was a medium first and foremost. Gordon also told me in World War II, a man right next to him said, "Oh, Gordon, I thought I was a goner then." And he was, as Gordon saw this man's spirit move out of the physical body. And one day, shocked to hear his mother shrieking, Gordon dashed to help. And he saw Fanny, his mother, throw a bar of soap at a tall, almost naked black native in the kitchen. And then they both realized that this was simply a spirit visiting them. And that's just some examples of how he sometimes mistook a spirit for a physical person. Just another quick photograph of the Arthur Findlay College. It's a good shot because it shows you the archways on the right and the acres and acres of land, and it's also got a beautiful lake. So many seasons, many visits, and that was a November time. I always felt I was going to a heavenly sanctuary, staying in a wonderful building with acres of land and lake, away from the material world, listening to interdimensional phone calls with spirit and spirit lectures to us. And our auras were always so much better on departure. So it just shows you we were all wrecked by the material world on arrival. And you can see behind me the chapel on the right, which I do think was built on later. The centenary year with the Spiritualist National Union, 100 years of spiritualism, Gordon and Jean Bassett gifted me with a book. To Jackie, it was a wonderful year. Best wishes, Gordon, President of the SNU. And to Jackie, have a good life and learn well. God bless Jean Bassett. She was a medium, a spiritualist minister, and she was, I think, one of the few people, if not the only person who's ever had the SNU Fellowship Award. This is another picture of the Arthur Findlay College. Ronnie was another regular, and we gave each other spiritual healing and drew each other's auras. He was a kind, loving soul who loved to channel healing. This one also shows Gordon's abilities. This lady was impressed to be told by Gordon that she had a crown on her head, and she admitted none of us knew she was actually the queen of her tribe. Ronnie was a wonderful chap, and sadly, when he passed, it was a great loss. And his family donated a bench to the Arthur Findlay College commemorating and celebrating Ronnie's life. And you can see over at the back there, the arches to the right towards the chapel. These are further pictures of the Arthur Findlay College. I feel like a tour guide. Gordon's invitations for discussions at Gordon's home. He kindly asked me if I'd like to come and have discussions, which we did. It shows you some beautiful rooms in the Arthur Findlay College and the land outside. So arriving at Gordon's home the first time, Gordon spoke to his feathered bird, which was tweeting away like she was an excited dog or child. And the pictures of Glyn Edwards, he was trained by Gordon. He's in the white shirt with the black beard, just behind myself and my husband. So arriving at Gordon's home, he lived with his sister Hazel. Gordon psychically knew I'm vegetarian, offering me pre-made vegetarian sandwiches, which was a nice surprise. Gordon psychically knew I was near enough to drive to his house, because previously I'd been living in Glasgow and it was an 8-hour drive to the Arthur Findlay College. So it would have been at least 4 hours to his house. But he psychically knew I was now nearer and able to drive to his house for discussions. I was now a lecturer in the West Midlands, which is next to Staffordshire. And Gordon predicted I'd write books and teach, and was destined to observe his and other mediums' demonstrations. But sadly, in 1993, Gordon passed prematurely. Gordon's predictions at his and Hazel's home. Now these, bear in mind, he passed in 1993, so these are 30 years ago. So if you can cast your mind back to 30 years ago, he told me then Europe would band together as a bloc. He also told me Scotland would seek to and probably break away from the UK. So I'm watching to see if it's in my lifetime that Scotland might do that. He also said England would seek to keep its cultural identity. Well, it's done Brexit so far. And he also said the Queen would have been 30 years younger then. She's about 94 now, so she would have been about 64 then. He said the Queen would remain on the throne to the bitter end, like Queen Victoria. He said Prince Charles would go on the throne, and he said his sons never will. So it'll be interesting to see if Charles is the last monarch of the UK. And he told me he sent predictions to the Queen and governments at intervals, including his predictions that a man with a birthmark on his head would serve Russia well, which is obviously Mikhail Gorbachev. He sensed his time was short. He told me this, and he told me that when he was in his car and going here and there, or when he was walking around the Arthur Findlay College, he'd be sending his thoughts out to God, spirits, to angels, saying, I have plenty more work to do here. Don't take me yet. So he had a premonition, or he just knew they were going to take him. So I'm sure he's got plenty of work to do there. And I'm sure he's smiling down on us now with the same thoughts in his head, because he never really had time off. He was lucky if he had 10 days off a year, he told me. So these are the books that have come out so far. So he's right on that prediction too. Gordon taught spirits retain personality and emotions and evolve after death at their own pace. I've learned that from a lot of direct voice mediumship recordings I've listened to as well. Gordon psychically read auras, the spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, and how each influences the other. If you're emotionally down, it will affect the physical, etc. And the coloured auric hues, the brightness, the refinements, they're all created by predominant thought patterns and actions. So these are also signposts of a person's potentials that would most fulfill his or her spiritual path or life purpose. I have personal experience of seeing coloured auric orbs of visiting spirits, and spiritually transformative, mediumistic and psychic experiences and spiritual evolution are what most interest me. Gordon taught me the delicacy of giving readings, and there was often a lot of humour in it. He used to say spirits don't become angels overnight. And he gave me, examples. A man had an affair. His wife clocked his mileage whenever he drove out. And the wife had readings with Gordon. This was up in Staffordshire. And the remarrying husband came for a reading, and his now deceased, angry and hurt spirit wife told Gordon, tell him I knew about his affair, and I know he's given my best coat to his mistress, soon-to-be wife. So he said it's very difficult sometimes that the spirit could be shouting and annoyed and giving awful things, and he's got to then try and tame it and pass it on to the person who's come for the sitting. But there was a great deal of humour with Gordon. One day, giving lectures as usual in the Arthur Findlay College Library, Gordon halted, saying the spirit wife of a man in the audience gives her blessing to his imminent second marriage. And then he went straight to the man in the audience and said, you must be marrying again soon. So Gordon said the spirit wife had passed tragically through suicide, and tragically she'd hanged herself, and the widower felt guilty about moving on with his life. The spirit wife told us she works with animals in the spirit realm who, loving life, were eager to live their lives, but their God-given treasured lives were often brutally and murderously taken from them. So the slaughtered, unloved animals had taught his spirit wife the precious value of life and the invaluable gift she had thrown away and the grief she had caused others. Another time, Gordon halted his lecture because spirits were knocking on the door of his brain and saying they wanted to be heard. It's not us always contacting them, it's them often wanting to contact us. He halted his lecture as a spirit had told him that a lady in the library had had a tragic loss, a miscarriage. He told her that all babies are destined by God for the earth plane of existence and would not be stopped by the mother's health or choices. That baby's soul would be born to a sister or the next generation if necessary, until it was allowed to have its destination, its destined incarnation. So he told her that she was very close to her niece, and she agreed. And then he said, do you know that niece is the soul of the baby you'd lost, tragically. So at the week's end, we often gifted Gordon with a lovely new jumper because he loved to wear his different coloured jumpers. And in fact, he'd turned down £1,000 for a reading from one man because he didn't want to tarnish his readings by accepting such money. So he was a very spiritually orientated man as well. Another story Gordon told me is when his mother, his teacher, early on took him to demonstrate evidence of survival as part of a service. He was young, naive, and critical of an old lady medium who was to go on the platform before him, saying, she can't see, she can't even stand up from her seat. How can she demonstrate to the church congregation? And his mother told Gordon to be patient. And amazed, Gordon said, when spirit came to this medium, she became completely rejuvenated and fortified and energized. More than stand up, she was walking sprightly around the congregation, reeling off evidential message after evidential message. And when spirit left this medium, immediately her health failed and she had to be helped staggering back to the platform chair again. So she was back to how she came into the church. And so for those brief time of the service, she was full of life and vigor. And that was energy from spirit. Spirit and the solar plexus, Gordon mentioned this. He told me of a time when stones were being thrown at the windows while he was demonstrating mediumship. So naturally, he stopped. And his mother told Gordon, stand your ground. So he continued, he said a bit nervously, but he continued despite the noise and the threat from outside. And he said, never be concerned when you're nervous and your solar plexus is jumpy. That is evidence that spirit are drawing close to help. And he always recommended to have some green around the home and to always sleep on a problem so spirit can guide us during the night. Gordon told me one example of a trade unionist in spirit. Well, he told me many examples, but I'm just giving you this one because it's quite a startling one. Telling his relative to sell the house to gain the money to fight a legal battle with an employer. So the man had done this and they'd lost. So the point of this is what I'm saying here is you should note that spirits will tell you what they would have told you in life. So judge carefully the spirit's advice. If you didn't take the trade unionist uncle's advice in life, don't take it because he's now got wings, because he's going to give you the same. It takes people time to spiritually evolve in the next dimension or the next realm, and sometimes they don't evolve that quickly. This is again the Arthur Findlay College. Eamon Downey on the right and Betty Wakeling on the left. Betty Wakeling, you would go and get a flower, you would put it in your hands, you'd put your thoughts and feelings into it, and you'd put the flower on her table. She wouldn't know whose flower it was. She'd come in and pick up the flowers, and between the petals, the dew, the stems, the berries, the information that she would give was astounding. And Eamon Downey, he was a jockey, and coming away from the races, he started to hear voices and he thought he was going mad and he might have had 1 or 2 hits on the head. And his sister took him to a spiritualist church, and from then on he realized he's a medium. So he travels the UK and America now, but he did work a great deal with Gordon as well, as did Betty from Blackpool. This is Mary Duffy on the left in the black and white jumper. This is the library where we always spent the time with Gordon at the Arthur Findlay College. Mary was, as I say, from Edinburgh. And the 2 of them regularly worked with Gordon, and she stayed at my home in the West Midlands for a period of time as well. And I could tell you lots of accounts regarding Mary and her experiences. And Betty, one day reading my aura, she told me I was a vegetarian, which really surprised me, because at that point in my life, I didn't realize that vegetarianism would show in the aura. And she also told me, interestingly, that I had a weakness in my throat, which I wasn't aware of at the time. But some years later, I lost the ability to sleep for about 3 years, horrible years. At about 6 stone, the doctors thought it was a brain tumor. Finally, they realized through an autoimmune issue, I had completely destroyed my thyroid. So I was running on adrenaline, not metabolism. So no wonder I couldn't sleep. But when I was alone all at night and not unable to sleep, I got so emotionally and physically low. I was exhausted, and yet I was so sort of spruced up with energy. And I used to pray, I can't live if I can't sleep. So when I look back on this, I look at it as a shamanic type of experience, or like the tarot tower card, where something falls down in your life or something is shattered in your life, but you rebuild better and for it. And why I say a shamanic experience is the shamans used to use deprivation regarding sleep deprivation or food or water deprivation or temperature deprivation to take themselves to skeletal proportions emotionally, mentally, physically, so that they could rebuild back up. So I look on it now as my shamanic experience, but it was a misery at the time. This is Mavis, who worked with Gordon a lot, and he wanted her to be like a mother of the Arthur Findlay College after his passing, but Mavis took her a different route, and she does great and fine work doing mediumship around the country and travels abroad. She actually invited me to her home in Manchester, where she gave me a reading. I'd had many readings with all the mediums through the weeks at the Arthur Findlay College, but this was at her home in Manchester. And it's interesting because she predicted my husband calling him, Spirit called him a healer. That was interesting because accurately, he, a doctor, arrived at the end of that year as Spirit had foretold. And I always remember her saying that Spirit say, it's not moon, June and roses, but endless conversations. And that's how it has been, endless conversations. So I don't think all doctors are healers, but I do believe my husband is. And it was interesting that Spirit defined him that way. This is the red rose from Gordon's coffin and the hymns at his funeral. And it's cherished. Gordon taught us life continues after death, and Emanuel Swedenborg taught us about varying after-death landscapes, like attracting like. Gordon taught the world we human and non-human animals have souls which survive death, and Gordon loved doing funerals. Why? Because Gordon watched the deceased watch him officiate at his or her funeral, often on the front row, often sitting with their relatives, but eagerly watching him. He'd be smiling at them, they'd be smiling at him, and he loved doing funerals because every time it proved so clearly that we do not pass, we go on and we pass on to spirit realm. Gordon watched the deceased walk around, checking who attended and who was genuinely upset. Again, he often had humor in it. And my soul adventure with spiritualism, my spiritual path began around 1980 and will continue for the rest of my incarnation and I believe incarnations. This is Glyn Edwards at the Arthur Findlay College posing for my photo. There he is on the left with the beard and the white shirt. After Gordon passed to spirit, I saw Glyn regularly overshadowed by Gordon when he demonstrated. It was just like watching Gordon, and I can see it to this day. It was Gordon. Sadly, Glyn passed to spirit following Gordon, so no doubt the two of them worked together. Coincidentally, Glyn was from Southport near my Aintree, Liverpool home. I hadn't met him there, but I'd met him at the Arthur Findlay College, and we got to know him very well. So he went at a young age, but I'm sure he's continuing to work with Gordon and trained by Gordon. I think the two of them will work well together. And to finish, Professor Archie Roy, he was a prolific writer, fact and fiction books. He used to bring his fiction books along to the night school class that he taught and sell them to us all. And he wrote so many academic papers. And fit and well in the Glasgow University Boyd Orr Building lecture theatre. It was then used for the large numbers Archie attracted to his SSPR lectures. Archie announced he was in the process of writing his next book, to be co-authored with Tricia Robertson. This co-authorship was not to be, so Archie will be remembered for A Sense of Something Strange, Archives of the Mind, and The Eager Dead. And he talked of spirits contacting for unfinished business, not necessarily us contacting them, but them tapping us on the shoulder to finalize unfinished business. So it's sad that he didn't see his book out. He passed away a considerable time later with pneumonia in December 2012. Now, I want to add that Clive Siegner, very kindly and interestingly, has been talking with Gordon and Archie. And he says that here tonight, he would play one or two of their answers. He asked them, will they attend the Zoom talk tonight? And from what he has sent to me, it looks clearly to me that they are. So these two men making history, Gordon Mons Higginson and Professor Archie Edmonston Roy, I was lucky enough to know them for many years, and what an honor to be able to speak about them tonight. And so if people are interested, I'm sure Clive would be willing to play their voices, saying that they're here with us all tonight.
Okay. First, thanks everybody for coming. And of course, Jackie, my dear friend, wonderful, wonderful presentation. I am an ITC researcher, and I was fortunate a few weeks ago to be able to talk to both Gordon and Archie. I have just a few recordings because I know that time's been long, so I'll just play a couple of these for you. I do repeat the answers a few times occasionally because I think it's a little more. It helps with the clarity of understanding, and. The first recording is from Gordon Higginson, and he answers, he said he must be there, basically, right now. So just hold a sec, I'll see if I can get this to work.
Will you be with her when she does her talk?
Could you hear that recording? Okay, good. So that's fine. And then I asked him towards the end of the session this question, and he says, that's much better. Yes.
Will you talk to Jackie when she tries to communicate with you via instrumental trance communication?
So those are the two from him. And then I've got a couple from Archie Roy, and I asked him this question, and he says, "Of course I will."
Mr. Archie Roy, will you be with her when Jackie Jones gives her talk about the lives of Gordon Higginson and you?
Okay, and the last one, he answers to this question, he answers, of course.
If Jackie is able to contact you through instrumental trance communication, will you speak to her?